But I love comics, I read comics, but in class there's always somebody, if you need a drawing of a horse, you say, hey, Amy, draw me a horse. I was never the person who drew a horse because I couldn't draw anything. But I loved comics and thought, well, I went to art school, I studied graphic design at Pratt Institute. When I got out, I started teaching and being a graphic designer. And I stopped being a graphic designer because I hated that. But I heard that in New York City, I was living in Brooklyn, in New York City at the School of Visual Arts, there were cartooning classes with 3 titans of cartooning. And so I was able to study with this guy, Will Eisner, who's the creator of a comic called Spirit, which was very important to me as a teenager. It was done in the 40s, but reissued when I was a kid, and I loved it. Very cinematic, film noir-y, kind of very funny and beautifully drawn. And this guy, I studied with this guy, Kurtzman, who is the creator of Mad magazine, and of all the teachers I've ever had, I learned most from Harvey reading his work. He was a master of creating, structuring a comics page and thinking about the formal elements of comics that we'll talk about later. And he's a sweet guy, and really he is my idol. But the guy who was the most important for my professional development was this guy, Art Spiegelman. Art Spiegelman was teaching at the School of Visual Arts, and within 2 or 3 classes, I met his wife, Françoise Mouly, who is now the cover editor at The New Yorker, and my life changed. I worked with them on a seminal artist comics magazine called Raw Magazine, which was a turning point in American comics. And while I was there, he was working on this book. So if you only have kind of a beginner's understanding or interest in graphic novels, and you have not read this book, shame on you. Go upstairs to the library and get yourself a copy of Mouse Volumes 1 and 2. It's a masterpiece, and it's the game changer in modern contemporary comics. It's a memoir of Art's parents, or Art's family, who were survivors of the Holocaust, except in this book, all the Jews are mice, and all the Nazis are cats. Which sounds like maybe silly or not going to work, but it's killer. It totally works. It's a masterpiece, in part because it's absolutely authentic, and in part because Art Spiegelman is a master of the language of comics. And from art, working with Art and Françoise, I realized, you don't have to be able to draw great, beautiful, sexy, comicsy drawings to be a cartoonist. You need to be able to think like a cartoonist. And this is a copy of an issue of Raw, so this gives you an idea of that sort of punk intellectual sensibility that was behind Raw magazine. So after I worked with Art, the first major piece of work that I did was Art Spiegelman saying, why don't you try to work on this project? I'm going to tell this whole story later this afternoon, adapting Paul Auster's novel City of Glass into a graphic novel. At the time, in 1994, Paul Auster was gaining steam as an author, but really wasn't that famous. When this book came out in 1994, there were not a lot of graphic novels. It was sort of before the great graphic novel explosion. Hard to imagine. Like, you walk into a bookstore. You walk into a bookstore now and there's like a whole area that's just graphic novels, right? Back then, they didn't know where to put this book because there was no show. It was like they put it next to, Peanuts or Calvin and Hobbes. It's just like, it didn't have any place. So it didn't do that well, except for people who liked comics. And for people who liked comics or read the novels of Paul Auster, it became a cult book, okay? The good news was that Paul Auster went on to become very famous as an postmodern American author. And so over the ensuing years, we may not have done very well with this book to begin with, but over the years, there's like over 40 foreign editions of City of Glass. And as Auster's stature has grown, and as the graphic novel has become more prevalent around the world, there have been more of these coming out.